So for anyone who wasn't able to join us, we'll be able to share the link. And I want to welcome everyone to our fourth reading in this year's Winter Writers Reading Series. My name is Sarah Lomas-Flesch. I'm the Executive Director of Shake Rag Alley Center for the Arts in Mineral Point. And if you're not familiar with the geography of the southern part of Wisconsin, we're in the southwest corner between Madison and Dubuque. A few of our typical Zoom housekeeping notes. We're going to ask everyone to remain muted during Kathie's reading, and then there will be an opportunity for Q&A when she is finished. And feel free to use the chat at any time to submit questions, comments, fan mail. We'll share the transcript with Kathie at the end of the reading. And before I turn things over to Kathie, I hope you'll indulge me a few words about our nonprofit arts organization. Since 2004, Shake Rag Alley has existed to provide arts and crafts workshops to adults and youth in literary, visual, and performing arts. And I'm gonna let somebody in really quickly. We are here to cultivate the creativity that thrives in our rural community, and we are stewards of our historic campus in the heart of Mineral Point, with 4 historic buildings out of the 9 that make up our campus. And I hope if you haven't been to Mineral Point before, I hope you'll come see us sometime. And Kathie wasn't able to join us in person this week, but we very much look forward to welcoming her sometime later this year or next winter, whenever it works out. Since 2011, Shake Rag Alley has partnered with Wisconsin Writing Contest organizers to offer week-long residencies to their annual writing contest winners. This year, we're delighted to welcome winners from Wisconsin People and Ideas magazine and the Wisconsin Writers Association Jade Ring first place winners. And next week, we welcome Wisconsin Poet Laureate Dasha Kelly Hamilton. We're grateful to the writers who join us and spend some time on evenings like this, sharing their work with the public, and in some cases they spend time with school district students here in Mineral Point. So thank you, Kathie, and thank you all for being here tonight. I want to take a few more minutes just to encourage you to check out our website and our literary arts offerings the rest of the year. We have standalone workshops. The first of those is coming up on March 5th, and the deadline is Monday. This is a Pathways to Publication one-day workshop that's being presented by Jacqueline Thomas, who's the first place 2020 Wisconsin People and Ideas fiction contest writer. She'll be talking about where and how to submit all manner of genres. We have a family history project class, writing from visual images virtual workshop. And later in the fall, we'll have a poetry workshop called Gathering Gold with Catherine Young. This May, we're hosting our 6th annual Mining the Story writing retreat here in Mineral Point. And we spend a weekend focused on memoir and personal essay, fiction, and this year a new segment will be research and writing. The cost of the retreat admission includes a weekend full of craft talks, panel discussions, open mics, and faculty and local author reading. And this year, we're excited to have the Wisconsin Writers Association joining us for the panel and the reading. And I'm looking forward to having some of their board members in town. We also offer a free monthly poetry workshop. It's a hybrid model where we have Zoom and in-person capabilities for this. It meets on the 2nd Saturday of the month, and we just last month kicked off the same model, free monthly prose writing workshop. And lastly, I'll mention our monthly anti-racism book club, which is continuing following our 2020 NEA Big Read of Claudia Rankine's Citizen, an American Lyric. And it was really incredible timing that we were reading that in 2020. And the conversations that started throughout that programming, which eventually had to be all virtual because of the pandemic, we're not done talking about we're not done having the crucial conversations that need to happen around race and racism in America. So for our first selection this year, we've spent January. Now we'll tomorrow night continue our conversation about the Hemingses of Monticello, An American Family by Annette Gordon Reed. And again, that is free and virtual. And there's still time to register for that. So to learn about all of the above, you can check out our website, sign up for our 2 e-newsletters a month. You can follow us on Facebook or Instagram, and we do have a print catalog that we'd be happy to mail you as well. So thank you for listening to that spiel. And now I'm delighted to introduce Kathie Giorgio, the author of, I believe it's now 7 novels, Kathie.
6 novels.
Still 6? 6 novels, 2 story collections, a collection of essays, 2 poetry chapbooks, a full-length poetry collection, No Matter Which Way You Look, There's More to See, was released in 2020. And this year, Kathie's just last month, your 12th book, All Told, was published. Kathie's been nominated for the Pushcart Prize in Fiction and Poetry and awarded the Outstanding Achievement Award from the Wisconsin Library Association, the Silver Pen Award for Literary Excellence, the Pencraft Award for Literary Excellence, and the Eric Hoffer Award in Fiction. Kathie is the director and founder of the International Creative Writing Studio, All Writers Workplace and Workshop, LLC. Kathie's poem, Again, won the 2021 Wisconsin Writers Association Jade Ring for Poetry. And the contest judge that year was former Wisconsin Poet Laureate Margaret Rosga, who said about Kathie's poem, in its 22 short lines, this poem offers both breadth and depth in its approach to the topics that have been at the center of our national experience for over a year and a half. The poem captures the essence of this double struggle by juxtaposing 2 succinct lines. We can't breathe, gasp the COVID victims. I can't breathe, gasps the Black man. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Kathie to tonight's reading.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for coming tonight. I'm so glad to see you. I thought, since I have a pretty generous amount of time to read to you tonight, I would also show you some ways that I have broken the rules, in case you think that you have to follow rules to get out there and be a writer. I seem to have made a career of breaking the rules. There's a lot that's out there that says, of course, that only younger people get published. I was actually published for the first time at 15 with a short piece, but I did not have my first book come out until I was 50. And now I am 61, and my 12th book was just released last month. My 13th book is coming out in August, and I'm at work on the 14th book, hopefully on the final draft. We'll see what happens with that. So there's that rule. And then you will also hear a lot about branding, that writers are supposed to brand themselves. I really go against that because I consider writing a creative art. And if we're creative, why should we do the same thing over and over again? Consequently, not just in short pieces, but in books, I've been published in poetry, essay, and fiction. So I try to cover it all. So I'm going to give you an example of each of those tonight, since I've got some time to read to you. I thought I would start with the poem that won the Jade Ring contest, again, which is what Margaret Rosga, was just talking about. This is called Again. In the middle of a pandemic, a great equalizer, we're all in this together. A white police officer kneels on the throat of a Black man. We can't breathe, gasp the COVID victims. I can't breathe, gasps the Black man. They die, he dies. Protests for civic rights, for civil rights. And we learn again, remember Ferguson? Again, remember Greensboro? Again, remember Little Rock? Again, remember Selma to Montgomery? Again, that equality is still a dream, even in a pandemic. We are not all in this together. Hands up, don't shoot. I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. From there, I wanted to show you, this is my full-length collection of poetry. No matter which way you look, there is more to see. This came out in 2020. And I'm going to read you my favorite poem from it. It also happens to be my favorite poem, period. I've yet to write anything in poetry that I like more than this one. It is a prose poem. So if you could see, it's a great big block. It looks like a square. And it's called Phosphines. Phosphines, noun. The colors or the stars you see when you close your eyes. Close, squeeze. The yellow of summer after summer, the sun painting you golden as you crawl in the sand, as you walk, as you swim, as you stand ankle deep in the lake with your hands in your hair, elbows cocked and hip out, and you pose. And red fills you to burst in your heart, in your veins, flow with hope as you ask to go out with the boy, 6 years older, a man, and your snarl is red as your mother says no and you can't, and you flare and the window is open. Red heats down your breasts to your belly, lights your way to the bar and the red lit back alley, and you give what you have, who you are, what you think that he wants, and he is gone to a girl his own age, a woman. And red clots and scalds, and you cry in your pillow, and your mother who said no braids your hair. Purple stretches like puddles, the good grades, the class ring, the gossip, and the hand of a boy with blue eyes who looks just at you, and you dance the blue starlight, and you foxtrot for glory, a diploma, a job, a wedding, a layoff, a baby, a fight, there's no money, a job, then a house with a yard and a dog and a cat and a fair, his then yours, a divorce and a cancer, a song at a concert, an online romance, a marriage, a late baby who stops breathing, your arms are so heavy, but then Paris and Greece and soft Sunday mornings, hot coffee, cheese Danish, a grave with red roses. You say goodbye to your mother, and blue slows to black, the black streaked with silver, the moon on your face, a grandchild's gilded laughter, a son's long embrace, a gold clock encased in crystal, and the night you sit by the ocean, the water, a silk whisper, a warm blanket draped over your knees. Open, open wide, brilliance. So that's poetry. And it was funny when my poetry books started coming out. I have 2 chapbooks in the full-length book of poetry, and I have a chapbook coming out this summer. Most people looked at me and said, but you write fiction. And I'm like, no, I don't just write fiction, I write poetry too. And I found it hard to believe. But they go hand in hand. You know, the love of words, it just falls out how it falls out, and you follow it. So nonfiction now, essays in particular, this, you'll see that this book matches the painting behind me, the cover. That painting was made for me by an artist named Mary Sadler Wyatt, who lives in Rockford. I asked her for a painting that, and I asked, is there a God creative writing? And she tried to find one. The first one she came up with looked like a Catholic funeral card, which is so not me. And then she came up with this one, and she added the pink typewriter because I especially wanted a typewriter because I had breast cancer in 2017. She chose to make the typewriter pink. This book, Today's Moment of Happiness Despite the News, was never intended to be a book. It was a blog. The blog continues today. It's called This Week's Moment of Happiness Despite the News instead of Today. This book came about because I had a situation happen at the beginning of 2017 that left me almost agoraphobic. I was afraid to leave my home. I became one of the national hate crimes that you saw after Trump was elected. I was on the news and there was, it was horrible. And I knew I had to break out of it. So I started writing a moment a day that made me happy. And I posted it on Facebook because I knew if I did it on my own, I'd quit after 2 or 3 days. Facebook made it public. And so people began to flood my Facebook page. So from there, I went to my website and made it part of a blog, and my website crashed because of high traffic. So I thought, fine, I'm going to do this every day for a year. I will never, ever do that again. And I didn't know at the time that besides this really bad beginning to the year, we were also going to be facing my husband losing his job not once, but twice, and taking our health insurance with it. And my daughter being bullied so much at high school that we were going to have to pull her from her school and put her in a new school. And I was going to be diagnosed with breast cancer. So it ended up being a year that honestly made the first year of the pandemic look easy. We went through so much that year. I wrote every day except for one, a moment that made me happy. I did not edit these. I wrote them raw. The only thing I checked was spelling and grammar and punctuation. And when it was all done, and I said I was going to switch it to once a week, people began to say, isn't this going to be a book? Aren't you going to put them in a book? I was like, no, I didn't edit it. And my publisher contacted me and said, they're asking for a book. Don't you think we should do one? So that's what this is. I'm going to read you, whenever I think of this book, there is one particular moment that always comes up first in my brain. So that's going to be the one that I read to you. And this was right smack dab in the middle of breast cancer. I had just set up the schedule to get 20 rounds of radiation therapy. My daughter Olivia is in here. So this is August 31st, 2017. And so today's moment of happiness, despite the news. Today, I realized that in the middle of all this hot mess breast cancer, I forgot my daughter. And in that realization, I just wanted to wave the white flag and fall to my knees. My daughter and I walked her schedule at her new high school again today. School starts tomorrow. It was partway through our walk that I realized. Olivia, I said, what time does school get out? 3:05, she said. When I had to work with the cancer center to set up my 20 days of radiation, I gave them a window of 1 to 5, my writing time, my meditation time. The radiation needs to be done. I worked it around classes. I worked it around clients. The majority of my appointments were set at 3:30. I forgot about Olivia. I forgot about school. For a 3:30 appointment, I have to check in at 3:15. There is no way her final bell can ring at 3:05. She can pack up and run out, and I can get her home and then be at the cancer center by 3:15. And it was about then my overwhelm valve blew. Oh, this week, what a dose of reality. All along, I was told radiation was easy. Just lay down for 10 minutes a day, meditate, take a nap. Simple. It's not easy. Every day I face that machine. Every day I lay there while everyone else runs from the room to avoid what the machine is doing to me, destroying unhealthy tissue and healthy tissue to make sure that unhealthy tissue can't come back. And every day I have to face for 10 minutes this new reality. Cancer invaded my life. Every day I walk under a sign that says Cancer Center. And I see people wearing baseball caps and headscarves, people who look like they would wisp in a fan breeze down the hallway if the nurse didn't anchor them by the arm. I heard one woman coming before I even saw her. Her breathing sounded like she was underwater. I heard her breathe past me, and I heard her breathe down the hall. I tell myself every day how lucky I am. But then today, I realized I forgot my own daughter in the middle of this hot mess breast cancer. The technician came to get me. Her name is Denise. She started to say, "Hey, Kathie, how are?" And then I looked at her. In an instant, she was holding me, rocking me, and I just completely blew apart. That's not something I do. The other technician came in and hugged and rocked me from behind, and I became the stuffing in a huge comfort sandwich. My own Oreo, though I was wearing gray. When Denise asked me what was wrong, I still couldn't find my voice. I just motioned around the room, and she said, "It's just all this, isn't it?" Yes, just all this. And then I said, "I forgot my daughter. How could I forget my daughter?" And I was sandwiched again. There was no hurry. There was no glancing at the clock, even though I'm sure I messed up their schedule. There was just soothing and comfort and compassion and care and lots of Kleenex. And then they left the room so I could be zapped. I watched Zappa, that's what I named the radiation machine. I watched Zappa move around me and hum, and I felt remainder tears roll from the corners of my eyes, over my temples and into my ears. I thought of the woman with the drowning lungs, and I wondered if that's where her tears went. As I was helped off the table, Denise said, "You didn't forget your daughter. You never, ever would. You're just full to the brim right now. It will get better. This will be over. You're okay." And she hugged me again, which was just what I needed. That hug pulled me back together, at least for now. And yes, that helps, despite anyway. One of the hardest days, let me tell you. And I can also tell you, since this just happened, I saw my oncologist last week. I am almost 5 years away. I get to go back to just once a year mammograms now. And on July 29th, which is my 62nd birthday, I will take my last oral chemotherapy pill and I will be done. So yay. So the last thing I'm going to read to you, which is probably the longest thing, I believe, this is All Told. This is my book that just got released. This is a novel. But even here, I'm breaking rules. Every single chapter of this book is a complete independent short story, beginning, middle, end, conflict, resolution. But it's also a novel. The novel has a novel arc. There is an entire story. There's a conflict and resolution for the whole thing. So I have a great love of short stories. If someone from above said I could only write one thing for the rest of my life, it would be the short story. So now in 3 of my 6 novels, I have incorporated short stories into them. The chapter I'm going to read to you is my favorite because it's the one that was the hardest. I kept getting to the end of it and sitting back, and I swear the character looked at me through the screen and said, "No, that's not it. It's not over yet." And I had to keep going back until I got it right. I'll read you the description in the back of the book so that you know what it's about, and then you'll be able to fit in with this chapter. Back of the book says, "Imagine being an other woman and then finding out that you're not the only one. There have been many other women before you and even standing alongside you right now." Jack learned early that one is never enough. Each chapter tells the experience of someone affected by Jack's trysts. Some of the women are married, some single, some divorced. The ages vary as Jack grows older. Then the reach goes further to the ripple effect of a hurt caused by infidelity. There's an adult son Jack never knew he fathered. There's also a bartender on the cusp of meeting the woman of his dreams, only to have Jack whisk her away by saying just the right thing. And there is a doctor who is shocked by Jack's abandonment of her patient, one of the other women, with breast cancer. There are the first 2 wives who run into each other 30 years after the first was replaced by the second. And there is the 3rd wife who is still married to Jack. Jack's mother also speaks at the beginning and the end. All Told tells more than the story of infidelity. It goes beyond the typical triangle of husband, wife, and lover. As the stories grow and involvements become more interconnected and convoluted, the question of who is cheating on who and why becomes more difficult to answer. Each chapter reveals another secret, but every secret has two sides, and in some cases, even more than that. So this is chapter, I can get my Post-it note. This is chapter 12. Each chapter has a title, just like a short story. And this is called When Abundance Isn't. As a fat girl, Sandy knew she wasn't supposed to have the opportunity for sex. According to society, at least society determined by television and social media, fat girls were a turnoff. They were roll upon roll of abstinence caused by abhorrence. But Sandy, and she assumed most fat girls, knew a vast secret. She was part of a secret society and knew what really went on behind closed doors. Men enjoyed fat girls. Sandy was 52 now, and from the time she lost her virginity to a boy she'd met at the library when she was 20 years old, she'd had no shortage of lovers. She was faithful to no one because she didn't feel the need to be. To hell with abstinence, to hell with abhorrence. Her life was abundant, and she was abundance. Sandy walked with a swagger and a sway that set her hips swinging like a bodacious invitation. An invitation she knew would be accepted over and over again. She wore curve-hugging shirts and sweaters with low V's that shouted the loud volume of her breasts. To see Sandy move was to understand the word prowl. To sleep with her was to understand exuberance. She embraced her lovers of all sizes and ages. She embraced them and then let them go, walking away with a strut and a sway to start on her next hunt before her skin had a chance to cool. But then there was Jack. Jack was not the first married man she'd been with. They met 7 years ago in the food court of the shopping mall where she worked at the large and luscious large women's clothing boutique. She accepted his story that his wife's illness kept him from sexual satisfaction as easily as she did his coy request to join her at her table when there were plenty of other places to sit. It didn't really matter if his claim about his wife was true or not. Sandy would have slept with him either way. She didn't miss then the way his eyes traveled so swiftly from her face to her breasts. His eyes widened that day in the food court, and they widened later that evening when they undressed each other. He held her hands, then opened her arms wide and said reverently, "My God, you are so beautiful." He appreciated her, as so many men did, and she appreciated his appreciation. She also expected it. But Jack was the first man she held a long-term relationship with, though she wasn't able to say what it was they were involved in. She wasn't his girlfriend. He wasn't her husband. She couldn't even say she was his partner or significant other, though she felt she held a significant place in his life. They weren't sleeping buddies or friends with benefits. They used the word love, and often. He said he loved her more than anyone. She answered, "I love you too." Maybe she did love him. She wasn't sure, but she couldn't say what made Jack different from all the others. It took 6 months of seeing him before she returned his "I love you." The first time she said it, she freaked out and hustled into the bathroom to stare at herself in the mirror. "Really?" she whispered. "Really?" Then a year into it, she discovered, also in the bathroom and without his knowledge, that he was sleeping with other women. All it took was simply stealing a look at his phone. She decided that his extra activity was okay because she was still sleeping with other men at that time, despite the "I love you twos." She didn't tell him, just like he didn't tell her. So she figured it was fair. But over the next 5 years, she slowly stopped her pursuit of others, and she stopped their pursuit of her. She said no to any man other than Jack. And to Jack, she said yes to his every request. Now, Jack was the only man in her life. "Sandy, why do you stay with him?" Crystal, her therapist, asked for likely the 100th time. Sandy gave her 100th answer, the same one over and over. "I don't know." She was being truthful. She didn't. Sandy had been seeing Crystal for almost as long as she'd been seeing Jack. The topic of Jack, especially as the field of Sandy's lovers narrowed down, came up often. They used to talk about her promiscuity. Now they talked about her devotion to a promiscuous lover. Sandy missed the personal promiscuity talks. Life was a lot easier when there was just man after man, when she was a part of the fat girl's secret society. Now it felt like a secret was being kept from her. Why did she stay with Jack? What does he do for you? Crystal asked. Jack had just been over the night before. Sandy's body was still revving below the surface of her skin. He's a great lover, she said. Crystal rolled her eyes. And Sandy wished she knew. She was living the old, I love you, maybe, but I don't like you very much parable. She didn't like Jack. And most of the time when Jack went home, she breathed a sigh of relief at the same time that she breathed a sigh of great satisfaction. She knew the nice things he said, that he loved her more than anyone, that she was his soulmate, that she completed him for Christ's sake, were lies. There were usually at least 5 other women in Jack's life, give or take, that were being told the same things. There were 6 if Sandy counted his wife, but Deb couldn't be counted anymore because she was dead. Jack told her Deb accidentally took an overdose of pills. Accidentally. So much that came out of Jack's mouth were lies. Crystal stopped waiting for an answer. How many other women are in the harem now? Sandy snorted. Women in a harem knew about one another. Jack's women didn't, except for Sandy, who only knew through subterfuge. She held out her hand and counted on her fingers. For a while, there was me, Sharon, Cindy, Susan, and Shyla. Sharon and Susan met each other and both dropped out at the same time. I saw their emails. Cindy got breast cancer and Jack quit seeing her. Then there was just me and Shyla, but in the last month, since Shyla moved in with him, he's added 3 more, Sally, Sarah, and Sophie. At the beginning of the count, all 5 of Sandy's fingers waved in the air. They folded to 2, to a peace sign, Sandy thought, but now all fingers waved again. Sandy wondered what it would take to raise just one finger and to have it pointed directly at her. Though she wasn't even sure if that one finger was what she wanted. If that finger pointed at her, she might point her own finger to the door. She loved him too, she said, but she didn't like him. Sandy remembered a time when she used to be very decisive. One look at a man and she could say if she wanted to sleep with him or not. Now she could look at Jack and know she would sleep with him, but everything else about him was murky. She wondered where the yes and no part of her vocabulary went. It seemed most of her conversations and discussions were dotted with, I don't know. Wait, Crystal said. Shyla moved in with him? Into his house? His wife died, right? Sandy nodded, her fingers folded in. She hid her fist under her thigh. Isn't Shyla the youngest one? She just nodded again. Remind me how long you've been seeing him. Crystal leaned forward. 7 years. They stared at each other. Sandy didn't say anything because once again, she didn't know what to say. Jesus, Crystal said finally, what is it with him and S names? He's going to run out soon. What will he do then? Move on to the T's? Sandy laughed, even though she knew it wasn't funny at all. She wondered if there had been A through R's. Crystal reached for a card from a holder on her desk, and Sandy knew she was writing down the date of her next appointment, always on the same day, always at the same time. Every week, Sandy wondered if she would keep it. Every week, she did. Sandy said goodbye to Crystal. As she walked toward the door, she focused on her stride. She reached for her sway. Lately, it was getting harder and harder to find her rhythm. She felt tired. When she was with Jack, she strutted for him. But the rest of the time, Sandy sighed and just dragged herself out the door. She wondered when Jack would call again. She would text him later, remind him of how fabulous the night before was and how fabulous the next night would be. There would be a next night. She was sure of that. Maybe. She didn't know. Sandy waited until 7 o'clock. Then she texted Jack. I'm still hungry, she texted. I'd like a Jack snack. That was what Jack called a blowjob. It made her cringe to use the cutesy term, but she liked to see Jack leer when she said it. He told her she was saucy. He texted 5 minutes later. I'd love to satisfy your hunger, sweetheart, he said, but I'm tired tonight, maybe tomorrow. Sandy texted a heart, received one back, and she sighed in relief. And she sighed in indignation. She just didn't understand. And what she didn't understand kept getting bigger. She sagged onto her bed, the bed where she rolled with exuberance and skill the night before, the bed where she said yes and then said yes again and again to whatever he asked. Sandy didn't know how it was possible that all of the other women hadn't caught on to Jack's extra activities. He always fell asleep after sex, giving Sandy at least a half hour to check his smartphone. Jack kept his valuables, as he called them, his keys, wallet, and phone on her bathroom counter. During his post-coital naps, Sandy slid out from under his arm, went into the bathroom, and shut the door. She knew he would never disturb her there. She sat on the toilet, put his phone on mute, and scrolled. Jack didn't even put a lock on his phone. He was that trusting, or that technologically ignorant. The smartphone gave her entrance to Jack's own secret society. All of his emails, his texts, his phone calls, voicemails, and all of the women who didn't know they were members. All of Jack's conquests found on Craigslist and adult dating sites, and chance meetings in restaurants and bars and malls were there. He didn't succeed every time, and he didn't delete anything. There were one-night stands, meet and greets that fizzled, women that only lasted a week or two or a month. She read everyone's individual conversations with Jack and recognized the things that Jack said to those that lasted. He said the same things to her. She wrote down all the emails and phone numbers, even the fizzles, and kept them in a little notebook in the bottom drawer of the bathroom's vanity. She found the women on Facebook, and she studied them. She could see their similarities and their differences. Susan used to stand out as the only married woman. Sharon, Sandy, Cindy, and Shyla were all single. But two of the new women, Sally and Sophie, were married, and Sarah was divorced. Shyla stood out as the only Black woman, and she was also the youngest, only 24. Jack was 64, a full 40 years older. The rest of the women were closer to Sandy's age. Even the new women, Sally, Sarah, and Sophie, were in their 50s. Like Shyla's ethnicity and age, Sandy could see her own difference too. She was the only fat girl. Cindy used to be large-breasted before the cancer, but Sandy was large all over. Jack seemed to revel in her size. He said he could lose himself in her. He sank into her. More cushion, less pushin', he laughed. He said, of course, that there was more of her to love. These things weren't repeated to the other women. They were for Sandy alone. There was more of her to love, made her feel substantial, abundant. It validated her strut and her place in the secret society, both Jack's and the world of the fat girl. Sandy always very carefully set his phone down on the counter exactly the way she found it. By the time Jack woke up, Sandy was back in bed under his arm and ready to say yes again, and he was ready to ask. It changed for a while after Deb died. One of Deb's few rules to the extramarital relationships was that Jack would always come home at night. But then she was dead, and so was the rule. So sometimes Jack's postcoital naps turned into overnights. Sandy didn't mind. When she woke with him next to her in the morning, her strut and sway rose with her, full force. He said he admired the view and pulled her back into bed. It also gave her more time to sit in the bathroom and read Jack's life. Then suddenly he was going home again. He said one evening that he felt uncomfortable leaving the home empty all night long. Sandy swayed her invitation harder than ever that night, and she extended it over and over in bed, hoping for an invitation to return to fill the emptiness in his house. It didn't come. On a trip to the bathroom on Jack's next visit, Sandy learned from the phone that he extended the move-in invitation to Shyla. It felt like a slap. At work the next day, Sandy was bagging a woman's purchase into a bright purple, large and luscious boutique bag when she saw a familiar head of curls go by the entrance. She couldn't be sure because she'd only seen that hair and that head on Facebook, but she felt a pull to follow. Okay if I go to lunch, she asked her manager, who agreed. Sandy walked as quickly as she could through the mall and caught up with the bouncing curls just as they turned into the Disney store. Sandy hated the Disney store. It was a tight fit for a woman of her size. She pushed through the racks of children's clothing and then maneuvered carefully into the displays of breakables until she could see head on the face under the curls and confirm that it was indeed Shyla. It was. Sandy pretended to be examining jewelry boxes while she studied the girl. Shyla appeared even younger than her age. She was looking at snow globes, picking them up, shaking them, and setting them down. Some of the snow globes swirled with white, while others sparked rainbow glitter. It was the glitter that Shyla seemed to prefer, until she picked one up of a silver moon over Cinderella's castle. When she shook it, it startled silver stars, and Shyla gasped. So did Sandy. Even from a distance, even for someone who eschewed sparkles, ball gowns, magic wands, and cutesy terms like Jack Snack, the snow globe was stunning. Through the glass ball, Sandy looked at the girl's face, the wonder in it, the glistening eyes, and the smile as bright as the stars as she shook the snow globe again and again. The girl. Sandy wondered at that reference and wondered why she didn't say the woman. Because, she thought, as Shyla twirled in a circle and then practically skipped to the cashier, because Shyla is a girl. For a moment, she was awash in anger so pure that she was sure her face flamed red. Her joints ached with it. This was a girl, and Jack moved her into his house. She thought of the fairy tale where a witch enticed children into her cottage with candy. What candy was Jack offering? What Jack Snack? This girl was a child. Sandy followed Shyla out of the Disney store and walked behind her down the wide corridor of the mall. Shyla didn't sway. She didn't strut. She walked with delicate footsteps. Her feet slipped into pink ballerina flats and her elbows pressed to her sides, carrying the box snow globe like a child carrying a bowl of ice cream. Sandy didn't strut either, nor did she take delicate footsteps. She trudged. At the entrance to Large and Luscious, Sandy stopped and watched Shyla mince away. Sandy wondered where she would put the snow globe in Jack's house. Jack loved golf and Southern comfort and action movies. He loved Pink Floyd. Sandy just couldn't imagine his house with a Cinderella castle snow globe in it. She couldn't imagine his house with this bright-eyed, happy-stepping child in it either. In his bed. Sandy, her manager called, are you done with lunch or are you just going to stand there? Oh, Sandy said. She couldn't even see Shyla anymore, and she hadn't had any lunch. She wasn't hungry at all. Jack didn't come over that night, and Sandy didn't text him. It wasn't until the weekend that he called and suggested they go out for dinner and a movie. Sandy agreed. Throughout the evening, Jack was the perfect gentleman as usual. He helped her with her coat, pulled out her chair, and he held her hand during the movie. Near the end, he moved his hand to her thigh and began a slow upwards caress. Are you still hungry for a Jack Snack? He whispered. I'm ready to serve you. Even in the dark, Sandy could see his leer. She tried to leer back, but her mouth just didn't curve right. She faced the screen. As they walked to his car, Sandy moved ahead to give him the view he admired and tried to shift into her sway, but she tripped and he quickly grabbed her elbow. You okay? He asked. She nodded and later tried to prove it in bed, but she felt clumsy, heavy. Jack didn't seem to notice. Afterward, he said, I love you more than anyone, Sandy, and then fell promptly asleep. In the bathroom, she checked his phone while he snored. She learned that Shyla had an overnight shift at her job. They texted each other twice during this evening, Once when Jack excused himself to the restroom when they were at the restaurant, and one soon after getting to the apartment when Jack ducked into her bathroom to drop off his valuables. Both times, Jack and Shyla professed missing each other terribly. Jack told Shyla he looked forward to her slipping into their bed at the end of her shift. He said she would wake him up from dreaming of her, and he would put her to sleep after satisfying her every need. He offered her a Jack snack. He loved her, he said, more than anyone. She was his soulmate. Sandy stumbled to the bed. When Jack woke up, he turned to Sandy, offering her a Jack snack too and a leer, and Sandy gently put her hand on his chest. I know, she said, and her voice shook. Her voice never shook. She wondered where her own leer went. What do you know? Jack said and kissed her. How much I love you? He slid his hand, his ready fingers, between her thighs. I know, Sandy said, about Sharon, about Susan, about Cindy and Shyla, and about Sally, Sarah, and Sophie, and all the others. And you've got Shyla living with you. Sandy felt the freeze of Jack's body. His temperature seemed to drop. He pulled his hand free and rolled onto his back. She rolled onto hers. How did you find out? He asked. Sandy thought about lying like he did, but then in a meek voice that she didn't recognize, she said, I read your phone. I've been reading it for a long time. She waited a moment and then said, I'm sorry. She didn't know why she apologized, but it seemed like she should. It was like saying yes over and over. They lay there in silence. Then Jack said, no, it's me who's sorry, Sandy. I'm so sorry. You know I never meant to hurt you. The others don't mean anything compared to you. There's only you. You're my soulmate. You know that. I love you more than anyone. Sandy braced herself. You complete me, Sandy. Sandy sighed, and she wasn't sure if it was a sigh of relief or satisfaction or indignation. It was just a sigh that shook her whole body. She felt like a gust of wind was released from secret places inside her she didn't even know about. Then why is Shyla living with you? She swallowed and realized her sigh was a sigh of pain. Why not me? We've been together for 7 years, Jack. Pain? Sandy was never hurt. Sandy swaggered. The silence went on for a very long time. She wondered if Jack had actually gone back to sleep. But then he sat up and swung his legs over his side of the bed. I asked Shyla to move in because I couldn't stand being alone in that house, Jack said. He waited a minute and then reached for his clothes, which she knew were in a pile on the floor. And I asked Shyla because she's only 24. I figured she has the least chance of getting sick in the near future, dying like Deb did. The rest of you are older. He stood and turned to her, and you, his arm swept, taking in the whole of her body, the whole of it. The body he said he could lose himself in and sink into. There was more of her to love. She was abundance. She remained silent while he finished dressing. Then she said in the new voice she didn't recognize, why were you with me at all, Jack? He looked at her much the same way he did that first evening together when he held her hands, opened her arms, and told her how beautiful she was. His eyes ravished her then, and they ravished her now, slowly, from her head to her toes, to her head, and then settled on her breasts. Sandy could feel his hands, even though they never moved from his sides, touching her, stroking her, hefting her. She felt her own heaviness. Because, he said softly, you were there. It was like the mountain. She remembered hearing as a kid that George Mallory, who climbed Mount Everest, answered, because it's there, when he was asked why he wanted to conquer the mountain. Sandy was a mountain. There was more of her to love. Jack left without another word. Her voice, her new voice, sank into her depths, into the spaces where Jack's secrets hid. More cushion, she thought, less pushing. In the bed, Sandy released a sigh of 7 years. 7 years of being climbed, mounted, conquered, and now left for another adventure. Tears were new to Sandy. She cried. For the next week, she texted Jack. She left voicemails. She used words that she never used before. Words like please, and I'm begging you, and please again, drawn out in that meek new voice until it disappeared in a sob. She offered him full freedom, the ability to see whomever he wanted, whenever he wanted. Just please don't leave me. He never answered. Back in Crystal's office, Sandy filled her in. She used her new voice. By then, it wasn't much more than a whisper. They sat in silence for a while. Then Crystal leaned forward. Sandy, she said. Sandy, I am so sorry. Sandy nodded. Her voice disappeared entirely. It's the end of the chapter. So do we have questions? Can we transition to questions?
Sure. Kathie, thank you so much for sharing those selections from your work. And are you, let's see, I do have a question from Tony. How do you know when you are finished with a certain section, chapter, or work? Although I have worked on my project for over 3 years, there are parts that I see that need to change. You mentioned one character speaking to you saying it isn't quite right yet. Is it common for characters to speak to you like that in your other writing projects?
Yes, it's common for characters to speak. I've often said that in fiction, you don't write the story writes you. And, there have been many times where I have been writing something and I think absolutely I know where it's going. And then I get to where I thought it was going and it's just not right. And I have to listen to the character. And in that particular story, it took me a while to realize that the issue was that he took all of her confidence away. And this is another difference she has from the other women. She was confident to begin with. She was very comfortable in her own body. She had no size issues. She was happy with who she was. And he managed to peg away at that and make her smaller than her size. And so it took a while for me to get there. And it was listening to her that got me there. I know when I'm done, and there's a couple different ways, and I teach these ways too. Sometimes when you're writing something and you get to an end, you have just a moment of being able to sit back in your chair and say, damn, I'm good. And it just feels right. And then right away, your editor kicks in and says, nah, go over it again. But when you have that moment, listen to it, as long as it's not happening at the first draft every time you write, then you can't trust it. There's also a moment, and it's very physical, where I write the last word, and instead of wanting to immediately go back to the beginning and start again, it's like my hands stop. And I end up folding them and putting them in my lap. And it's like it's my body telling me, that's it, you're done, it's okay. So wait for those feelings. If you're someone who never, ever, ever seems to come to an end, and yes, I've dealt with students who are that way, I ask them to put a number of drafts in place. I am going to write this story, this poem, whatever, in 10 drafts, and then stick to it. When you get to the end of that draft, put it out into the world and see what the world says. If that same person says, I will get this story done in 3,452 drafts, there's a problem. There's just, again, a real lack of confidence. So I try to make them pull back on the number of drafts. But I even had a Facebook picture up this week showing the first page of this book that I'm working on, that shows the dates of each draft, when it started and when it ended and what the word count was, to show people that I do multiple drafts. Because I've had 12 books out in a short time, I've been told that people think I just quick write a book and put it out there. I don't. it takes draft after draft after draft. And I'm on draft 7 of this current book that I'm working on.
Wow. Tony, thank you for that question. I was going to ask Kathie if you would share, it's fascinating to me what you've accomplished in almost 12 years. Can you walk us through your journey from education to publication? Why was it not until you were 50 that you had published your first book?
I have no idea.
Fair
I
enough.
really don't. I mean, I had 4 agents, 2 top-notch New York agents, and I ended up firing them and selling the book on my own. But I started writing basically as soon as I could. I'm used to, and this is going to age me, I used to take carbon paper and trace the pictures out of my picture books and then rewrite the stories the way I felt they should be written. And so I wrote very early on. Like I said, I was published for the first time at 15. I rewrote the story of Christ in 1970s lingo, because this would have been 1975. And the Catholic Herald Citizen, of all places, chose to publish it in a serial over 4 weeks. I went on to get a degree in creative writing from UW-Madison. I actually majored in 2 other things first because my parents told me that I could not make a life out of writing. It had to stay a hobby. I had to do something that would earn me money or they wouldn't support my college education. I started in special ed, ironically, especially focusing on autism. And now my daughter that I mentioned in the nonfiction piece, my daughter is 21 years old and autistic. And so I deal with autism every day, but it's an amazing journey. And then I switched to social work, and I only lasted there for a semester. I took the first class I took was the history of social work, and it about killed me. So I switched my major to English with a creative writing emphasis. And I told my parents that if they did not continue to support me in college, I paid for my room and board, they paid for my tuition and books. And I said I would drop out of school and work until I could afford to come back, but that this was what I was going to do. Luckily, I guess they did continue to support me, but from that point on, if someone asked them what I majored in college, they said, oh, she's getting married, and would not talk about what I was majoring in. From there, I graduated from college in 2000. No, God, don't make yourself younger. I'd like to. I graduated in 1982, was married, had 3 kids very quickly, continued to write. And I joined a community education creative writing class taught by Ellen Honeycutt, who was a writer in Big Bend and had won the Drew Hines Award. And I mean, she was amazing. And she was the first person who told me I had the voice of a novelist and that I should write literary fiction. And she remained friends with me for a very long time. When I got my first job teaching, which was by pure accident, I immediately called her and said, what the heck do? I have no idea how to teach. And she helped me through that too. Then I finally went for my master's, my MFA in fiction. I graduated in 2004. It was a 2-year non-residential program in Vermont College of Fine Arts. Worked with some great writers. I worked with Laurie Albert and Mary Grimm and Francois Comoyne and Philip Graham, among others. But I went primarily for the teaching cred because I was already teaching everywhere I could. Once I got my first class, I was well known as a short story writer at that point, and word got out that I was teaching. And so I began to teach at UW-Madison's community education, UW-Waukesha's, UW-Milwaukee's, College of Lake County and Grays Lake. I worked online for Writer's Digest. I helped them set up their online writing program, which was very new at the time. And I wanted to cross over into credited teaching. So I went for my MFA, and the 4 semesters that I was there, I outsold the entire faculty in the short story 3 of those semesters. But I was shocked when I got to the end of it and I went to a panel called Life After the MFA, And we were told, if you have one book out, you might get an interview. If you have two books out, you might get a job. And of course, at the time, I had no books. And I was horrified by that because I was already teaching. And so I decided to start the studio. I opened All Writers in 2005. We're 17 years old now. We are international. I teach people from around the world. And one of the hardest questions I faced was a student asking me, why don't you have a book out? And my answer was, I don't know, because I had done everything I was supposed to do. I had the education, I had the short story credits, I had won the awards. And the two agents that I had, the first one represented a book that is now called In Grace's Time. It came out a few years ago. Very quiet book. And she shopped it for a year, and that was the main comment. It was a beautiful book, but it was quiet, not much sex, not much violence. And so she suggested I shelve it and we market the next book. And the next book was The Home for Wayward Clocks, which was my first novel. And she read it and she said, it's a beautiful book, but I don't deal with dark material. So my choice was to write something else to keep the agent, or fire the agent and try to get another one. So I did. And I found another agent, and she got me when she emailed me, and the header was your beautiful novel. She also tried to sell clocks for a year. In the first month, we had a response from somebody from Scrivener's. She's the editor that did Memories of a Geisha. I can't remember her name. And she said, I love this book, but it needs some editorial direction, and you're too early in the process for that. Somebody else might take it as is. So come back to me if nobody takes it. So she marketed, the agent marketed it for a year. We had someone from Algonquin contact her who had seen one of my stories and wanted to know if I had a novel. And she said, of course, yes, she does, but Scrivener's has first bid. So I thought I was made in the shade, two big publishers who are waiting for this book. Got to the end of the year, nobody wanted it yet. And Algonquin was quiet. And I said, can we talk to the one from Scrivener's? She said she'd give me editorial direction. And the agent said, well, I don't want you to do that. Most of the time when that happens, by the time you finish rewriting the book, they've either moved on or they just don't want it anymore and you've wasted your time. So I went back to Vermont College for a residency. I was a graduate assistant and Wally Lamb was there. He and I went to the same school. And I asked him, what do I do? And he said, agents or New York editors don't give you second chances. If this one is giving you a second chance, you tell your agent that she works for you and you want to talk to her. And then you let yourself think about it for 24 hours and see if you can do it. So we did that. And the editor said she wanted me to switch it from first person to third, which I was like, oh my God, how easy is that? But then she said, I want you to bring out the fairy tale nature of the story. And I had no idea there was a fairy tale nature to my story. So I spent 3 hours, I got in my truck, and I always connect a song with a larger piece of work that I play every day before I write, and it gets me back into the storyline. And for that book, it was Clocks by Coldplay. So for 3 hours, I hit replay while I was driving. And I came up with starting with a second person sequence that starts with imagine. And I thought, well, it's kind of like storytelling, which is sort of like fairy tales. Okay, got it done in 6 months. And in that time, that editor had moved to another publisher and was no longer into literary fiction. And I honestly don't know why Algonquin turned it down. If my agent told me I don't remember it, I've blocked it. So I was back where I started with an agent who was saying, let's shelve this book and go write another one. And I said, no. So I went out and it took me about 6 months and I sold the book to the Main Street Rag Publishing Company, which is a small press. At the time, it was the premier press for literary fiction and poetry. And the publisher, Scott Douglas, told me that New York missed the boat with me. And I was the first book the publisher took that required no editing whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So I was with him for 6 books, but unfortunately, he's a stubborn man. And he did not want to put the books on Amazon. He did not want to do ebooks, and he did not want to do audiobooks. So when I was working on the next book, I mentioned on Facebook that I had another book ready, and a publisher who had published my husband and many of my students said, "What would it take to get you to come here?" And I said, "I want cover control. I want to choose my release date, and I want an ebook and an audiobook." And he said, "Done." So then I switched there for 3 books. And now with this book, with All Told, I didn't like what I was seeing happening with this publisher. I'm seeing signs that he's going toward being a hybrid instead of being a traditional publisher, and I will only do traditional publishers. So I marketed it, and I ended up with 4 contracts on my desk for All Told. And I went with a much larger publisher, saw the word advance for the first time in my life, and have a hardcover and a soft cover and an ebook and eventually an audiobook. So that's where I am now. But honestly, to answer why did it take so long, I don't know. I really don't. And it really is the luck of the draw, being in the right place at the right time. And I just had to make sure I was in that place and follow a little different path.
Thank you for sharing all of that. Fascinating. All of it's so interesting.
Long.
That's okay, well.
My original goal was to be a household word by the time I was 20.
Oh.
Well, I'm still waiting, but. Anything else I can answer?
Any other questions, you guys?
Yeah, I have one. I was just wondering, since you kind of play with structure a lot in your stories, how do you choose structure? Do you have like subject matter already in your head, like story, outline already in your head and form the structure around it? Or do you go with the structure first and form the story around the structure?
I guess I would have to say I go with the story first, or the idea. Let's even start with the idea. I often don't know when I throw a first line down. Is it going to be a poem? Is it going to be a short story? Is it going to be a novel? And there have been plenty of times that I thought something was going to be a short story and it ended up being a novel. And one time when I was writing down notes of what I thought was going to be a novel, and it ended up being a flash fiction piece. So I really let it go with how it feels while I'm writing it. I don't outline, and I really do not structure at all. I just do what feels natural at the time. I thought this book, All Told, I thought was going to be a short story collection. And then after I wrote the first story and then began to work, actually, I thought it was just going to be a story. The first story I wrote was called Something Other. And I got to the end of that, and it was where one of the women met one of the other women. And I thought, well, now what about her? So I started writing her story. And before I knew it, there were all these stories. And as I put it together, I was like, there's a novel arc here. And so it became, I thought it was a novella because it's relatively short, but the publisher preferred to call it a novel. So I'm very much a seat of your pants writer. I am not a planner at all.
Great question, Carly. And I was going to follow up and ask Kathie, have you worked with something, tried it as a poem, tried it as a short story, tried developing it further? Like as one idea, have you worked through the different genres with one idea before? Okay.
Yeah. And I think, that's kind of like where this little flash fiction piece came from. I honestly thought it was going to be a novel, and it took me a while to realize, no, I was already done. But I will jump from genre to genre if I feel like something isn't working out. And I never quit. I never put the idea away. I've been quoted as saying that I've never had writer's block, and I truly haven't. And I think it's because I don't give up on the ideas. One of my favorite New Yorker cartoons from a long time ago showed a writer at his typewriter, and all around him on the floor were crumpled up sheets of paper from where he had started to write something and then ripped it out and crumpled it up and threw it down. And the little comic showed him saying, well, I didn't get anything done. I must have writer's block. And I was like, but there's all this stuff on the floor that could have ended up being something else. So I try not to edit myself into a standstill. I just keep trying to make something work. I see Tony. Tony has a question. How much sex do you need in a novel to make it not quiet and marketable? That term quiet, Tony, has pretty much disappeared. We don't see it too much anymore. Now people call it an intellectual novel or a thoughtful novel. I don't think there's a sex requirement anymore. There used to be. I mean, we went through a period of needing sex and violence and things to capture people's attention. I think there's all sorts of way to capture people's attention now. We don't necessarily have to stick with sex. So I really don't even know how to answer that anymore because quiet is no longer a thing. I know, Tony, and Tony, your book is good, so you're not going to have to worry about it. Anything else?
Well, Kathie, it's been so great to hear from you and both what you read and what you shared about your work. And I want to thank you for joining us virtually. And we do look forward to seeing you here in person when the timing is right. And I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. And you do have some fan mail from Angie there.
I see that. Thank you.
Right. And
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We look forward to watching what you do next and keeping up with you. And I do invite everyone to join us next week if you can for Dasha Kelly Hamilton. And when we're done with our series, I'm going to send out an email blast with, I will not bombard you, but just a quick email and survey to thank you all for your time and solicit your feedback on this series. So
excellent.
Thank you so much, Kathie.
Sure. Be watching in August for the poetry chapbook. It's coming out by Finishing Line Press, and it is called Olivia in 575, Autism in Haiku. Oh. And the final poem in there is written by my daughter, who is now a junior at Mount Mary College, has been a Dean's List student every single semester she's been there, is writing a novel, is a gifted violinist. And autism is really something she has embraced and which has really enriched our lives. So I wanted this book to come out.
Excellent. We definitely will watch for that. Thank you so much.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Have a great night.